ولا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu to our viewers and listeners. This is study number 21 of the Ramadan Daily Quran studies for the year 2020, and I am Zahid Aziz, who is delivering these studies. In this study, we're continuing from the verse from the last study, which described who is righteous. And as I've read that verse in Arabic before, and I'll be dealing with a part of it, so I will not re-recite it fully in Arabic. But that verse goes on to say, after mentioning what a righteous person has to believe, it says, righteous is one who gives away wealth out of love for him, that is to say, love for Allah, to the near of kin and the orphans and the needy and the traveller, and to those who ask, and to set slaves free, and keeps up prayer and gives the zakat, and those who are performers of their promise when they make a promise, and who are patient under distress and affliction and in the time of conflict. These are they who are truthful, and these are they who keep their duty. Verse 177 of chapter 2. Here, zakat, or the obligatory charity due on a Muslim's wealth, is mentioned separately from giving away wealth out of love for him, and to those categories which are listed in that verse. And what zakat is it should become a national fund that Muslims contribute to. And a national fund in a Muslim country, or a community fund of the Muslim community in a non-Muslim country. And this shows that the spending which is mentioned just before this as giving away wealth out of love for God, that is voluntary charity by individuals at their own discretion and choosing. Islam recognizes a role for both the state or the community and also for the individual in spending money to alleviate hardship. In what's called the pure capitalist system of economics, that system doesn't recognize such a role for the state, but it leaves it all up to the individual to help the poor. On the other hand, the pure socialist system doesn't recognize such a role for the individual, but leaves it all up to the state entirely to help the poor and the disadvantaged. Now, both are necessary, help from the state as well as from individuals giving charity. The individual's role not only helps the person who receives the charity, not only helps the recipient, but it also improves the moral character of the giver, and it strengthens bonds between human beings. In this list of various categories to whom a righteous person has to give wealth out of love for Allah, first, the near of kin are mentioned, that is to say, near relatives. A person is most duty bound to help those nearest to him in relationship, because he knows their circumstances much better than he knows anyone else's circumstances. And this also shows that Islam envisages a society in which the same families have both wealthy and poor members among them, so that the wealthy ones of that broad family have the duty of helping the poor ones. So Islam does not envisage a society in which the wealthy don't have any poor relatives and the poor don't have any wealthy relatives. And that is a society which is divided and segregated into rich and poor families. It should also be noted here, and it can be seen, that Islam does not restrict that any of these deserving people in these categories should be Muslims. There is no such restriction. This is clear from the fact that in a very early revelation in the Quran, in chapter 90, it describes as a noble task, and I quote verses 13 to 16 of that chapter here, as a noble task to free a slave or to feed in a day of hunger an orphan who is nearly related, an orphan who is near of kin, or the poor man lying in the dust. And according to this chapter, the people who undertake this noble task of freeing a slave or feeding the poor man and the nearly related orphan, they are described in this chapter as those who believe and who exhort one another to patience and exhort one another to mercy, in verse 17 of that same chapter. And they are called the people of the right hand in that chapter. And that chapter contrasts them with those who disbelieve, who are called the people of the left hand. Now, when this revelation came, there were so few Muslims that the slaves that they could free, or the near relatives and the poor whom they could feed, they would all be, almost all of them, be non-Muslims, because Muslims were very few. In chapter 4, verse 36 of the Quran, it is made explicitly clear that a Muslim's charity should extend to all, regardless of their religion or nation. That verse gives a list of those to whom a Muslim must do good. And in that list, it mentions first parents, near relatives, the orphans, and the needy. And then it adds this category, and the neighbor of your kin and the alien neighbor. The neighbor of your kin is a neighbor who is related to you in some way, but it could be someone from the same race, someone or the same religion. The alien neighbor is one who belongs to another people, another nation, another religion from what you are. So the alien neighbor is equally mentioned in that list in verse 36 of chapter 4. Now, according to the verse that we are discussing, verse 177 of chapter 2, slaves are among those on whom the righteous must spend their wealth. That is to say, to have them freed from slavery. Now here it is voluntary charity which Muslims are encouraged to spend for this purpose. But in verse 60 of chapter 9, it gives items of expenditure for the state-collected zakat, the zakat collected by the state from Muslims. And among those items of expenditure, one is the setting of captives free, the setting free of captives. So both the taxes paid by Muslims to their state, if they are in a Muslim state, or to their community, to the community fund as zakat, both those taxes and the private charity given by individuals among Muslims, both of those can be used to purchase freedom for slaves. And moreover, we also may notice here that in the Quran, sometimes there are penalties or punishments prescribed for certain offenses. I can't go into the details of those offenses, but one penalty which is offered to the offender as an alternative is that he may free a slave if he has the means to purchase freedom for him. You can see this in chapter 5, verse 89 and chapter 58, verse 3, where for some committing some offense, the penalty includes that you can choose from one of number of penalties that the offender can actually give, and one of those is that the offender should pay for the purchase of the freedom of a slave. Apart from spending wealth on deserving persons, a quality of the righteous is to give food to those who need it. And in another place, the Holy Quran speaks about the righteous, abrar, the same word used in the verse we are discussing. Using that same word for the righteous, abrar, the Holy Quran describes the righteous as وَيُطِّمُونَ الطَّعَامَ عَلَى حُبِّهِ مِسْكِينًا وَيَتِيمًا وَأَسِيرًا إِنَّمَا نُطْعِمُكُمْ لِوَجْهِ اللَّهِ لَا نُرِيدُ مِنكُمْ جَزَاءً وَلَا شُكُورًا, which translates as, and they give food out of love for him, again out of love for God, to the poor and the orphan and the captive, saying to them, we feed you for Allah's pleasure only. We desire from you neither reward nor thanks. And this is chapter 76, verses 8 to 9. Now, the captive mentioned here includes slaves, which is the main and primary example of what a captive is. So, out of their love for God, the righteous give them food, and they do this completely selflessly. They ask from the recipients no reward or thanks. They ask for no reward or thanks from the people whom they help. Another quality of those who want to be righteous, mentioned in the verse under discussion, verse 177 of chapter 2, is as follows: the performers of their promise when they make a promise. This means that to be righteous, a person in actual practice must be true to his word. The promises of such people made to others, they are not made to deceive people or to impress them by mere talk, but those promises should be converted into action. And promises are not things you promise informally to your friends or people you know, but the legal contracts that we enter into with, for example, our employers, our employees, other people that we have transactional dealings with. Those are also promises that we have made according to our contract to carry out. And the righteous are those who perform their promises when they make a promise. So it can be seen that this verse 177 of chapter 2 blends together the following elements: the fundamental beliefs and doctrines of Islam, the formal practices of prayer and zakat, love for God, service of humanity, and lastly, the highest personal moral qualities of truthfulness, and also perseverance in the most adverse circumstances. That total combination produces a righteous person. And it is not merely the ritual actions of prayer, such as which way to turn the face, which make a person righteous, as that verse makes clear right at the beginning. This then is the end of study 21. Barakallahu lana wa lakum fil Quran al-Azim wa nafa'na wa iyyakum bil ayati wal zikril hakim. Allah Ta'ala jawadun karimun malakun barur raufur rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.